the idea behind this is clearly, things are picking up, or shall we say, before COVID-19 made its interesting appearance, things are starting to sort of pick up in terms of the deployment of networks, the development of the independent sector. A lot of new and exciting sort of players coming into the scene. So we really wanted to have a look and see what the independent sector was now starting to offer, but also starting to look at some of the challenges that the independent sector and the sector as a whole was starting to face. Then we started to have to go to the webinar format, and we're still developing that, but for this one we've gone for a slightly different approach to try and have more of a debate about some of the key issues rather than just go for presentations. So as you see, we've got 3 of the key issues that we want to really look at, hopefully in some depth, and see what's going on and what perhaps needs to be done. So we've got the wholesale and retail competition. Many of you will be aware that Ofcom is starting to sort of really try and drive that agenda and drive up the issues of retail competition in particular. So what we will do in a moment is have the keynote presentation from Markham Sivak from Ofcom on that, and then we've got a panel to have a debate, and we'll take that format through the afternoon. So following that, we've got the Royal Agenda from Carolyn Johnson in DCMS, and Oliver Johnson from Point Topic will be giving a bit of a summary in terms of where we've got to in terms of funding and delivery in the independent sector. So that's the format that we're hoping to go for. So to try and make this simple, when we go to each debate, can we have the panelists who are involved in that debate switching on your cameras, please? That way we can limit the people shown on the screen to those panelists, and that makes things a bit simpler for everybody else to follow. Those giving the keynote speeches, simply share your screen when the time comes and give your presentation. If there are any issues, hopefully we can deal with those at the time. But Rob, unless you've got anything more you want to say, shall we start going on the first presentation and then debate?
Yeah, let's crack on. I think we need Markham, which we've got. We need Tim, Oliver, Michael Maltby, and Lloyd Feltham. If you'd like to turn on video, Michael Armitage, you can turn off video for a while until your section later, if that's okay. Thank you. Good stuff. I'm going to turn my video off because no one wants to see me.
Malcolm, thank you very much. Over to you.
Lovely. Someone is able to put my presentation up?
I can probably do that. Do you want me to do it, James?
Tell you what, let me do it.
James, I've got slightly out of order, I noticed as well, so the final slide should come second last, but we'll deal with that when we get there. There aren't that many.
No problem.
Right. So I've been asked to speak about wholesale and retail competition in broadband. What I'm going to focus on in what I'm talking about is really Ofcom's attitude to promotion of competition at all levels, and to highlight some of the statements we've made about that, and also touch briefly on copper switch off, which is a topic which does touch on this in quite a critical way. So if I go to the first slide, or sorry, the next slide. Just to make it clear that we've been pretty consistent about our messaging on this for a number of years. In fact, we were first thinking about independent fibre deployment well back in 2008 when we put out a statement then at a time when we started to see small-scale deployments into individual housing estates. At the time, our concern was not so much one or two housing estates, but whether there would be a big trend in this, and also a trend in independent networks. And we wanted to make it clear that we weren't in a position of forcing everyone in the market to offer access services. Where companies were in a position to dominate a particular area and that there was exclusive provision by one network, then our attitude would ultimately be that an expectation that that network would offer access services. In other words, would offer a wholesale provision to enable some degree of retail competition. It goes to the heart of really what we were designed to do, which is to ensure that consumers had choice to the greatest possible extent. And it's, you know, as we said at the time, we didn't adopt a formal regulatory approach then and there, but that's not to say we can't. The measures we regulate Openreach or BT with, required wholesale, are exactly the same measures we regulate Hull with a population of 200,000 houses as a separate company. And there's nothing actually that has a de minimis size. So in theory, we could look at an individual set of houses. I think individual house might take it too far, and suggest there was significant market power and at least impose some type of proportionate intervention. Now, obviously, we would do that where we thought it could be effective. A standalone remote network, which would be difficult to interconnect, well, we may or may not decide whether that was worth the effort. But when something got to a certain size and affected enough consumers and the practicality of wholesale services was there, then I think our attitude would be quite different. If I can skip to the end, the final slide. Next one, yeah. Oh, no, sorry, one back. And I think it's consistent also when we, in our 2017 Digital Communication Review, where we talked about the benefits of competition. And it really was around incentives of choice, incentives by choice to consumers, provide value for money to consumers and for quality. Now, quality can come both at a retail and a wholesale level. There was the aspect, obviously, that investment, that competition drives investment, but our intent was that it drove multiple investments as far as possible. Now, we recognize there will be situations where, and we've said that in our most recent consultation, we think it's unlikely to be viable for multiple networks to compete. I think the point might be, though, that if a network is taking up enough area and isn't offering wholesale services, isn't offering value for money, isn't meeting that, then really the choices we would have would be to regulate that, or to observe a strong player come in and take over. If I can go to the final slide, just to the one in the middle, unfortunately, so just to confuse everyone. It'd be worth highlighting another aspect here. At the moment, we have pretty high level coverage of superfast services in this country. Now, there's been lots of examples in the recent crisis of people experiencing very poor quality of service, very poor outcomes. I'm sure all of you could point to villages, communities, areas of even cities where the quality of service is very poor. But if you draw a big enough circle around it, you'll find a lot of people enjoying a relatively good quality outcome. That's being provided largely over Openreach's network on copper-based services with fibre to the cabinet or even some traditional broadband. We're not ever in a position to compel the withdrawal of that service. This is an Openreach-owned asset or BT-owned asset. It isn't ours to command its withdrawal. what we are in a position to do is to stop withdrawal. While Openreach is considered to have significant market power in an area that covers a place where withdrawal might be possible, we would only be allowing withdrawal if we felt that the circumstances left to consumers were at least as good as they were experiencing before that withdrawal. So in other words, if by withdrawing a copper service, say Openreach decided, due to the existence of an alternative network, they didn't feel it was worth them investing themselves, they didn't wish to continue providing services there, then we would have to be convinced that what was left over on the provision of that alternative network was at least as good. And I mean, this is going to be a very political issue. It's very hard to imagine their constituents are going to be happy, will be happily talking to their MPs and saying, I now find myself not able to get the same services I used to get. I can't access the Sky package in the way I used to. I can't access the TalkTalk package. So it would become very quickly a politically unsustainable position, even if we wish to do so. And this is going to come up, and it is coming up in discussions with BT UK and issues around access in funded areas. Now, obviously, they come with wholesale obligations, but will exist in other areas as well. So I think I'm making this point quite strongly because there's been a lot of expectation that getting in an area first with a fibre service will lead to the removal of legacy services. That isn't necessarily the case. I don't have any more slides. I mean, the other big points are, there was a point made that we have a new focus on retail competition. I don't think that's true. I think we've always had a focus on retail competition. We are very keen to support and cooperate with any initiatives to make that more viable. We appreciate the difficulty in offering wholesale services at a small scale. One of the challenges always has been in the whole area of encouraging entry into that market. And therefore, going back to my earlier point, it's unlikely we would be imposing any regulation where we thought it was non-viable. But really, if anyone has an ambition about supply, would they want to remain at a level where it's not viable for us to regulate them? Because that would be suggesting that they weren't interested in expanding to a reasonable size entity. I mean, that's all I have to say, really. I'm open to questions about our position, about how we would respond to certain circumstances, and anything else that comes up.
Okay, Malcolm, thank you very much. If we could now have the panelists for the first session to introduce themselves. It might be easier if I just sort of do them out in name order, just so we don't get everyone tripping over themselves. So Lloyd, if you want to make a start and just very quickly introduce yourself, your company, that would be very helpful, please. Thank you very much. Lloyd, I don't know what's wrong, but you're not muted, but you're very, very quiet. Now
well, I can answer a question that's come up in the meantime, which is there a timetable for when copper services will be closed down? The answer is no. What we are proposing at the moment with Openreach is a withdrawal of copper services on an exchange-by-exchange basis as they have rolled out their FTTP networks to those exchanges. And there's certain thresholds we would expect them to achieve before they can withdraw even offering a copper service, let alone withdrawing the network from existing customers. So that they need to have 75% coverage of a particular exchange area, and they can begin to not offer new copper services. And once they've got to, well, we say 100%, but there's some caveats on that. But once they get very close to 100% coverage, then they can begin withdrawing, or a process to lead to withdrawing copper services from existing customers. But that's exchange by exchange.
Okay, so before we get into that, let's get the panelists introducing themselves. Michael Maltby, can you see if your microphone's working okay and introduce yourself?
Let's find out. I'm Michael Maltby, CEO of Jurassic Fibre, based down in the southwest of Exeter.
Great, thank you very much. Oliver Helm.
Yes, I am CEO of Full Fibre, and we are entirely wholesale, which I think this is a slightly different category here. Yeah.
Okay. Tim.
Hi, I'm Tim Stranack. I'm a founder and director of Community Fibre. We're London's largest 100% full fibre network and largest user of Openreach's PIA service in London, apart from Openreach, of course.
Oh, I might have to correct you on that. I think you'll find that everyone says, of course, Openreach doesn't use PIA. Let's not worry about that just at the moment.
I'm sure with equivalence they do. So
there's another question altogether. Lloyd.
So Lloyd Felton, County Broadband, and also head up the special interest area on wholesale for Inca.
Okay. We have to sort of show a certain level of interest here, I suppose. So you say show up Inca's sort of special interest group on wholesale. Do you want to just say a quick sort of issue about that and where sort of that special interest group stands in terms of the question of wholesale?
Yes, I think it was a good idea. I think that Inca has recognised for a long time that wholesale is a difficult market for the independent network providers to enter. I think it was referenced in what Markham said. And however, we are now in a situation where there are a proliferation of independent network providers, many of whom want to offer their services on a wholesale level, but many of whom find it very difficult to attract the interest of the national CPs, who possibly for completely justified reasons are unable to develop systems and integrations for each of the individual independent network providers. Therefore, the idea and the principle is very straightforward. We create a single platform that the CPs have to integrate to only once, and the independent network providers can then integrate to independently from that. That will create the opportunity for all of the independent network providers to offer a wholesale service. Now, it's my view, and I can't say that it's mandated across the development of the product or the idea yet, but it's my view that at that point, the independent network provider then has the choice as to whether they offer a service that is what we might call Ofcom compliant, or whether they just choose to offer their own services on that wholesale platform. I'll be happy to expand on what we mean by Ofcom compliant if anybody wants me to.
Okay, before we get into that though, opinions vary. Michael, I know that you obviously have a very different view on the issue of wholesale. Yeah, go on, your views.
No, I don't think it's that controversial. I mean, I think there's very little which Markham said which actually is controversial. I think our view is it's a matter of scale, it's a matter of terms and conditions. I think we also are concerned that what we're really dealing with is the 4 foot 8.5 issue, which is for wholesale to really have any meaning, there has to be some common underlying principles in terms of how we design the networks and systems, because otherwise interoperability and the ability to enforce any SLA will be extremely difficult. So part of our position is we're concerned that are we putting the cart before the horse without actually having the standards agreed which we're all going to design our networks around? Who's going to trust anybody else's network to actually take up a wholesale offering? I can't see TalkTalk, I can't see Sky taking up wholesale offering on a network if they have absolutely no ability to enforce quality of service. So I think so to my mind, this is partly a much bigger debate. I'm not saying it's the wrong debate, and I think we're certainly cognizant that if we grow, and as we all have plans, we get to a certain scale, then yes, we would expect to find Markham knocking on the door, and saying it's time to discuss wholesale. I think we have to be cognizant that wholesale comes with significant costs in terms of software systems, which will clearly, if you're saying, do we drive the expansion of the fibre footprint, or do we focus on the competition aspect of wholesale? There's clearly a trade-off there which needs to be discussed. I think the other thing that, listening to what Markham said, which is I'd like him to maybe expand more on, is the concept of scale. We can see that on the one hand, Hull has a couple of 100,000 homes premises passed and has obligations, but if we look at the UK ultrafast landscape, by the end of next year, the dominant ultrafast network in the UK, which will have the most significant market power, will be Virgin. They'll have 16, 17 million homes passed. Openreach at best will have 5 or 6. So the question is, in those circumstances, the easiest way for Ofcom to expand choice, ultrafast choice in the UK, would be to insist that Virgin opens up its ultrafast networks to wholesale choice. And yet that doesn't seem to be an issue. So we do find ourselves also slightly puzzled that the focus is on the little guys, but the obvious gorilla in the room who can actually take you a long way down the early brick road to where you want to get to is not being discussed. And I'd be very interested to hear why Ofcom are not actually focusing on Virgin, given the circumstances.
Are we finished going through? Would you like me to respond to that, or do you want other people?
It's a question for
Markham. Yeah, if you would, and then Tim will get to you.
I think it's quite straightforward with Virgin at the moment. I mean, it does go to the nature in which we regulate. So we regulate through an examination of markets. We define markets that are suitable for regulation. And at the moment, we do not find there to be a separate market for ultra-fast services. So there is the same market for super fast and arguably still even traditional broadband, but we accept there's more arguments there, and ultra-fast services. And that goes not to the capacity of those networks or those services, it goes to consumer demand. So we are seeing consumers choosing between Virgin and BT, Openreach-based services, and making those choices and moving back and forth. It isn't a market where there's a clear one-way direction. It isn't a market where people don't see these things as non-substitute. In that context, Openreach remains the dominant operator, or BT remains the dominant operator of a physical network. And that means that we only have the right to regulate one party there. And at the moment, that seems sufficient, that the regulation of Openreach is driving investment by Openreach, it's driving in others. And you say a focus on small networks. I don't actually think we have a particular focus on small networks. I'm talking about it because I was invited to speak. No one is imposing obligations on anyone today. The message I'm giving is twofold. One is, if you are successful and you remain and you somehow dominate the provision of broadband services in a given area, then there is a risk of regulation, because it would have to come to the same arguments and same path that we have everywhere else. The other message I would send is, there is a risk that if you're not offering wholesale services and you can't get a sufficient number of customers, then there will remain an opportunity for other people to invest in that area, and in particular other persons, obviously is Openreach, who come with wholesale contracts which command a significant proportion of retail heads, essentially. So, I mean, I think there is both a pull and push aspect here. There is, if you're comfortable remaining retail only and open to the fact of potential competition, and you are unlikely to dominate a particular area in terms of provision of broadband, we'll never talk to you about it. No, that's fine. That's your commercial choice. In the same way it's currently Virgin's commercial choice. However, if you are very successful, and that includes potentially not allowing, not having a viable competitor entering the market, then the chances are we will want to regulate you. And then finally, by not engaging in potential wholesale opportunities, you're in creating the environment which is more likely to lead to a competitor entry. That's a big sigh, Michael.
But before you carry on with that,
To be honest, Markham, where I get to is, regulation would be a nice problem to have, is what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because regulation means we've clearly done jolly well.
Yep.
So I think, from a practical point of view, I don't have a problem with what you said. I mean, it makes a lot of common sense.
There are steps on the way to that, which might give you problems before Ofcom does.
No, absolutely.
Let's get into that. So, Tim, you wanted to.
Can I just chip in? So I understand what Markham's saying, and a significant market power and market review process that we go through to set those regulations. But we also all operate under general conditions. And I've always been confused because general condition number 1 says that operators must negotiate interconnect agreements. And we just don't seem to enforce that. Taking Virgin as an example. What's the view on that? Why don't we use that regulation to ensure everyone provides wholesale?
It's a telephony interconnect agreement. These are not broadband interconnections of networks.
I didn't. Last time I read it, I don't think it was specific about whether it's telephony.
Well, I think it's probably because it's very old. It relates to telephony. It relates to the fact that you should be able to originate a call and have it terminated on somebody else's network.
So no,
that is almost the point, isn't it? Because if you extrapolate that to today's world, that means that any CP should be able to start their content on their network and end it on any potential end user's network, and any end user should be able to request content from any CP. That's the equivalence of that interconnect in the modern world, isn't it?
And at the moment, regulation hasn't extended there. I mean, I think you're right. We're going to see a whole lot of new types of online regulation. In fact, I'm about to go on a secondment to the CMA to start working on the online task force there, which will be looking at online service regulation. But I suspect what we're now talking about is the service level issues of connectivity. So there is a number of layers. There is nothing in our regulation that directly addresses physical broadband network interconnectivity. And I mean, I'm not even quite sure what I mean by that, but there is nothing there that does that. So the ability for a ISP to interconnect to somebody else's network to provide, to operate wholesale services, there is no obligation on either party to either reasonably receive such a request or to make such a request.
And I just guess my point is that general condition 1, even though written for telecommunication or telephone services, doesn't actually say that. It does say that network operators should interconnect with one another. It's not specific about telephone.
They very much do. I think there is guidance, but they very much do. In that if I want to send an email to someone on another network, I can do that tomorrow. If I want to do a Skype call, I can do that tomorrow. That type of connectivity of communication is a natural consequence of IT.
Using the internet as the medium, not an interconnect between networks, which is what general condition 1 talks about.
Oh, okay, hold on. Oliver, you've been distressingly quiet almost on this.
So I think we see this
in a different perspective, and we would do as we're wholesale. But from our perspective, the market space has evolved significantly recently to allow wholesale, possibly with the exception of really deep rural. And we see it purely as the only viable way to drive the take curve past the point at which Openreach could justify overbuilding us. So in areas where we can build to an extent, 100% exchange area coverage or very close to it, or even in smaller areas, if we want to hit a penetration rate at any form of rate that's going to surpass 30, 40%, wholesale is key to us leveraging that. And I think that the funding space has evolved significantly now. The conversations we're having with funders are really, really different to conversations we would have had 2 years ago. Funders appreciate the concept of wholesale. They see the effect that that can have on take curves, and they see where altnets to date and phase one altnets have hit with take curves and how wholesale can unlock that. But that therefore is slightly a historical problem in that to date funding has had to show an all-inclusive model to be able to justify that higher ARPU and to get the return point in. But as deployment methodologies are changing and as investment mindsets are changing, actually that changes and that works. And one of the big things that comes up is, and I think Michael, you flagged this, is how do we get an enforceable SLA? How do we get enforceable standards? How do we get the interoperability to work with the bigger players in the market space? And we land TalkTalk Sky, that's a 20% take boost immediately. And I think if you talk to them, the answers are that actually there are standards. They don't necessarily work how they interact with Openreach at the moment, but there are standards and SLAs and things there that they like and that customers use. And it's how we mirror those. And that isn't always easy, but it is a benchmark. It's a benchmark which Ofcom have largely set, and it's about how we meet that. And actually, I suspect that most of the altnets are largely delivering some of that. So the problem isn't so much about how we aggregate. It's not so much about how the larger ISPs want to integrate with all of the different networks. It's about how we make sure we are all working to a same high standard, and that the regulation piece is sort of a sideline within that, really.
Okay. If I can add one thing, which I think complements that, is that yes, you clearly need a high standard, a resilient, strong network to be able to sell wholesale services. And I would argue wholesale services, as supporting your point, are necessary if you really want to command a sufficient market share to discourage a competing entrant. The other thing is, if you do become the dominant or even sole network in a given area, another part of my organisation will have an interest in you, which is the ones who care about resilience and supplier of last resort, and a whole lot of issues of you are now carry the communication network. So what are you going to do to be able to demonstrate that in the event of these different types of emergencies, now to go back and look at general conditions again, your network will continue to operate, will continue to provide the essential access to emergency services, continue to provide all the things that what is becoming one of the core utilities will continue to operate regardless of circumstances. So again, it goes to that earlier point that if you remain small and you're not a threat of becoming the sole supplier, you can kind of do what you like. But the moment you get anywhere near being a major operator in a given area, a whole lot of other burdens come with it.
And that's expensive. And that's one of the key things about the wholesale piece, but you can't do as an integrated ISP. You can only do it, what you can do as a wholesale, but it's different. It's that the cost of acquisition of a customer is high, and competition only drives that higher within a physical. And that's why having 3 fibers into a building is terrible from my perspective. But providing that, maintaining that resilience, rolling the network out to a scale where you can support that is one work stream and very expensive. But it is equally expensive, and in some cases more expensive, particularly in competitive areas, to acquire that customer. And the established CPs, the big 3, big 4, have the marketing clout for that. They have the brand reputation. They have the money to do that, and that's what they're very good at. And at a smaller funding round, which is where all the outlets really are in the UK, we don't have the same clout. Wholesale allows us to unlock that and leverage it and focus on building that resilient infrastructure so that further down the line, if regulation things do come in and depending on how pop switch off moves, we're much better placed and structured to deal with that.
I think I can just say that when our phone service got disconnected in our village, most of us turned to alternative communication methods that we all have available to us now. My point being, the landscape under which this legislation was first laid down was completely different.
Yeah, I think we've got some questions coming in, and I would the same. Basically, won't 4G, 5G replace the supplier of last resort? Ofcom has already accepted that.
Can I make a point on that? There's a danger with thinking about these types of services in the way that we as kind of relatively able-bodied people deal with emergency services. A lot of our concerns relate to health alarms, relate to high-risk consumer support measures, which are often integrated into networks. They're not things which require someone to pick up a mobile phone and call a 999 service. They're the fact that the security systems are linked into the broadband. They're to do with the fact that your grandmother's thing that she wears around her neck when she falls down the stairs is linked to that. Or increasingly, the systems which monitor health systems are linked to it. Now,
with all due respect, when that system went down in this village, those systems didn't work. They didn't work then.
No, and that's the problem which we the fact that these systems are problematic means that we're in against the existing standards, and we'd be wanting to be better and better. So it's not that these things are going to get worse than they are at the moment. There is already quite stringent demand, and we still have failures. I'm only making the point that you won't be able to get less than that, and if anything, you drive as these things become more and more critical, is for them to be ever higher quality of service.
Okay, we need to be a little bit careful about that, but I don't want to take time with my views on that. One of the
question about why large ISPs are not being made to use alternative networks. I mean, it's a slightly odd question. I must admit, you tend not to require people to buy things off other people. It's a very unusual market regulatory structure that forces people to consume products against their will. I suppose what's coming here is, why aren't we setting up an environment where there's some type of franchising or sharing of networks across the country and everyone gets one? That's just not the way we're operating here. We see competition as the driver of the best outcomes. We see it as the driver of our preference would be multiple networks. We accept the fact that in significant parts of the country that's less likely, but it's not that we're at the moment in a franchise model.
That I find very interesting and slightly alarming. If we think we've got the Future Telecoms Infrastructure Review saying that approximately 20% of homes will only be served by one network, because in 20% of cases, the market will only support one infrastructure provider. Now, that makes what you're saying quite difficult, doesn't it? Because basically you're saying that in those cases, you have this asymmetry. So as Reverend Peel has pointed out, in those situations, the network provider has to accept that they will provide connectivity to all the ISPs and go through the pain of providing that, but the ISPs aren't forced to use it. And there's that issue then of basically who is the customer and who is buying what then?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there is a problem. The ideal outcome is that the people providing those networks are able to provide a platform that will encourage entry. These ISPs aren't not wanting to serve there. They're just not going to do it if the cost of serving is disproportionate. The benefit to the new systems means the costs are going down, but there needs to be a platform. It's one of the things we talk about with BDUK all the time. It's one thing to have a obligation to have an open network. It's quite another that people, you can lead horses to water question. They are very keen to try and make the environment right for that. I think there was another question on one of these about whether government would be prepared to support or fund any type of initiative. I'm not sure. I think it's something worth engaging with the UK on. I mean, the most likely outcome to have a lack of retail entry will be a balkanized environment where there's multiple small network operators, none of which are sufficient scale for an ISP to engage with.
And I think that comes back round really to at least establishing some common platform that we can all at least provide an entry to market for. And I think for a lot of companies, that those companies will reach scale that may mean they move beyond the common platform. They have their own systems, their own processes. But if we as an organization can bring together the independent networks and say, there's the platform, it answers and addresses so many questions that keep getting asked at governmental level. Whether those aren't, whether that becomes then a standard set of SLAs, etc., those are very, very different discussions. But in the first instance, making all the independent networks available across the country has to be the objective.
I mean, the white elephant of this is always the price point at which wholesale services are made available. And it's very tricky for an established integrated CP to drop the price points that Openreach is selling at, and therefore that the large ISPs expect. And particularly in the really rural, in your deep rural, dropping down to £16, £15 a month is virtually impossible with cost per prem pass within that. But the regulator has focused for a long while on competition within the marketplace. The large ISPs have facilitated that, and that has driven the price really, really low. And that does make it hard for established networks to build onto that, and for new networks. It provides a really different structure. I think it is plausible, but the business model has to be completely separate to support that.
Can I just change the subject briefly before we run out of time, which we may already have done, just because of my interest in PIA, and I think there is a sort of industry thought process going on at the moment to PIA or not to PIA, and we've definitely gone into the former camp. One of the things our investors ask us is they tend to be looking at over a 15 to 20 year life cycle rather than potentially the 5-year life cycle of the market review. And one of the questions we keep getting is, well, will PIA still be available in 2027? Now, my answer to that is, well, unless there is competition to that physical infrastructure, then presumably the regulation will still exist. But I don't know whether, Markham, you can give me any further reassurance on that point.
I mean, that is my answer. We deliberately created a market around physical infrastructure for the purpose of stability. Previously, access to the infrastructure was based within essentially the wholesale local access, the broadband access market. And clearly, you could have a problem of logic there, in that the more successful PIA was, or access was, the more local networks it could evolve, and then there was a risk of a challenge to the regulation of that market in and of itself. Now, there are mechanisms around that, complicated theories around modified greenfield examinations of market structures. But we didn't want to have some type of very complicated regulatory argument every time we sustained this. So we wanted to go to a point which we thought was very, very stable. And regulating at the point of physical infrastructure struck us as very, very stable. And in fact, it's self-reinforcing. The more people use Openreach physical infrastructure to provide the service, the less likelihood of alternative physical infrastructure existing of a suitable form to be considered at all a competing network. Now that even Virgin is engaging and using this, who were the only reasonable competitor of any scale to them, it really fundamentally undermines any risk to a significant change. Now, I am prepared to put any money on 2027. I'm prepared to put a lot of money on 2037 and quite a way into the future. There may come a point where this goes away. What would happen? Say we remove the SMP obligation. There is a backstop legislation which is access to infrastructure, which is that you all have a right to use Openreach and anyone else's physical infrastructure for the provision of telecom services. So absent the SMP regulation, what would happen? It would fall back on the fact that some of the specific regulation on pricing and terms and conditions might drop away, but there is an overriding fair and reasonable obligation under access to infrastructure. If you were considering fair and reasonable, you would obviously look at what were the existing contracts that had previously been in existence. So the chances of it both falling away is very small, but even if it fell away, for a radical change in the conditions under which you could access this infrastructure would be very, very remote. So, I personally think you could make an argument there is no chance of being forced to exit this infrastructure. There is a infinitesimally small chance of reality, or at least a small chance of a material change in my screen went blank. A material change in terms and conditions, other than the normal, accrual over time of changes in contract terms.
Okay, we've got a question. Sorry, coming in specifically for Lloyd, I think. So from John Caradis, how long will it take to build a single wholesale platform? And are the likes of Sky involved? And what does Ofcom compliant mean?
Great question.
Okay.
2 minutes, Lloyd.
Okay. Well, how long will it take to build it? This is something that we have under feasibility now. We've got operators that have agreed to fund feasibility study to do this. We have already engaged with a number of technology suppliers to support the build. And the answer to that is we expect to have a working model available by end of this year. I would suggest that under the legislation in place, we want to have that in place in good time, and in good time at the end of this year would be that. Which still gives us an additional 3 to 6 months to develop further if we need to, under the terms, because we're combining this with these, which we haven't mentioned, but we're combining this principle with the GPL. So it's the GPL that's actually driving our direction here. And the timing on GPL is very specific. I think we're talking at September 21 that we must have that in place by. So our view is that we will have the wholesale platform and the GPL more or less ready side by side and operational prior to September 21. And certainly wholesale, there's a lot of work going in, so we're expecting to see something coming in the coming year. The other question.
Is Sky involved?
We're certainly approaching Sky and the other CPs. That's part of the program of what we're doing.
Okay. I'm not going to go down the route of what does Ofcom compliant mean, because we haven't got enough time. So,
I'm going to answer ever so quickly.
Go on
means all I mean by Ofcom compliant in my description is that whether you as an independent network want to offer a set of standard service level agreements and products that mean a major national CP can offer its services nationally over different networks. So there is some commonality between the products that you're offering. That's what we mean by that. And that's the choice of each independent network operator. And if you choose not to, then I think the ball falls back into the court of Markham and his team to say, well, do we legislate alternatively?
Okay, we're moving sort of readily into the break. Any final thoughts on this from the panelists?
I think, James, just to clarify one thing. Lloyd mentioned a lot the term GPL, and just wanted to clarify to all of those attendees that aren't aware what that means. GPL is gaming provider led, and it relates to the requirement under the EECC guidelines on switching. So that's switching service provider, but what is coming to force next year is the ability to switch onto different infrastructures, which is a key change. So it's a gaming provider led solution. There are two options in place, and the industry is discussing. Okay.
Michael, any last thoughts?
I think it all comes down to scale. You know, there's going to be significant costs to becoming Ofcom compliant, whatever that means. And, you know, to be able to, if you're going to go onto the platform, you've got to be comfortable that the additional funds you'll earn are going to be justify the investment becoming compliant. And so I think you go back to the 4 foot 8.5 question, which is what are the underlying technical standards required to be Ofcom compliant? And until we answer that, we don't really know how many people will be in a position to move onto the platform, even if they think it's a good strategic idea. So I think what I would be looking for Inga to do is start answering the 4 foot 8.5 question as part of this exercise.
Tim, any last thoughts?
No, I don't think so. Other than I think obviously the switching platform is a very good idea because it has to happen. But the wholesale platform also a very good idea that I'd encourage everyone to get behind.
I think there is only a limited window of opportunity now for us to try and do this. So again, we'll be sending something out to all of the independent network operators, trying to outline the basis of the proposal and obviously seeking their support for what we're doing. So that's to follow.
Oliver, the last question or comment falls to you.
I think it's great that we're looking at how we can facilitate this as an industry, but I think it's really important that we bring those large CPs along with the journey now. It is a question of scale. At the point that the UK altnets get to a scale point that they are bordering on SMP, that these providers will start to see loss of customer, loss of revenue for not onboarding the altnets. So at that stage, they will change their tune and price point. It's an interesting discussion, but we need to start that conversation with them now rather than down the line once we've bought a platform. You know, I think there's a risk of building a platform without facilitating them early enough into the process, and they have really clear ideas now of what they want, and we need to shift that around a little bit.
Okay, thank you very much. At some point, we will try and pick some bits out of that and get some thoughts in terms of what it all means in terms of an overall summary. But that's perhaps a job for tomorrow when we listen to the recording. For now, we need a quick break. We'll be back at 10. Well, what I encourage people to do in the breaks is go and get yourself a cup of tea, cup of coffee, whatever you want, but be back, sort of reasonably quickly. We'll get back to the sort of the formal agenda at 3:10, but we will have a Q&A session with sort of Helm and Titan in the meantime, looking at some of the products that they got in terms of the rural broadband in particular, I think. And it is the rural agenda that follows after the break. That's very waffling sort of lead into a break, isn't it? Go and get yourselves a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, and we'll be back in a few minutes.
Excellent. Yeah. Thanks, James. Tony, are you around?
Hello.
Oh, hello, Tony.
How you doing? All right.
Yes, good. That was really loud, actually, in my ear.
Oh dear, sorry.
No, it's okay. Just thought, whilst we're still on coffee break for a few more minutes, just have a chat about Helen Titan. Wondered what you're seeing in terms of demand spikes in rural areas or perhaps anywhere, and especially has anything changed since the COVID situation?
Well, we've been ramping up for the last 2.5 months. We had an imposed furlough for 2.5 weeks while we got the production areas ready for the staff to come back, just to sort of keep them social distancing. And in those 2 weeks, we have never been so busy. It's just gone crazy. And this is carried on, and we're getting exceptional orders in from the likes of Virgin, dare I say it, Swish, City Fibre, Community Broadband. All of them are just ramping up. It's gone crazy. So I guess they're making the most of putting stuff in the ground and aerial deployment while things are a little bit quieter. But yeah, it's full steam ahead, and I think we're on for a very, very busy year, and it's only showing signs of growing. So it's a positive for us, and our normal lead times of 15 days from order have sort of jumped up to 20 to 25 days, purely just because of the volume, trying to keep up. And we're looking to expand and get more production staff, but again, they need training up. So we've got a handful, but it's a positive step.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
So, and that's again right across the globe. That's rural, in cities. The whole setup is just flat out right across the board. So it's a nice broad spectrum for us. And I know it's keeping Matt Hunter very happy.
Yes, I'm sure it is.
It's nice seeing him smile. He smirks, but he's smiling now.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's the rest of the other manufacturers as well. But I mean, it's nice for us purely because we manufacture everything here at Northampton. It just makes like we're a bit more, we have more control of what's going out. But again, it's caught us on the back foot a little bit from the demand, but it's a positive that we're turning around. It's happy days. Like the rest of the operators, it's just busy. I guess that's right across the board.
Yeah.
Michael Maltby, are you still there?
I was
Element tea break.
I was going to ask Tony whether he's ever thought about moving into active equipment, because it seems like we're looking for UK and European manufacturers of active fibre equipment now, seeing as the government seems to be going off Chinese manufacturers quite quickly.
Yeah, that's something that that would be the next pay grade up from me. I know we have worked with a few companies on supplying our connectorization for active cabs, and our technical director, Jason James, has been involved in a few discussions. I haven't been privy to them, but I know it's something we were talking about. So I think we can never afford to say never. It's,
watch your space, I guess.
Yeah, no, exactly. Matt's quite forward thinking about our MD, Matt Hunter. He always wants to get involved in as much as we can, but we don't want to overstretch ourselves. But we've got the capability to do it. It's just, as you say, watch this space and let's see what goes on. If anything changes, I'm sure Matt and our marketing guys will start throwing information out there. But it does make sense.
Yeah.
Michael Maltby, whenever you're back, let me know. During the last debate, I occasionally take a policy, which is a sort of a barrister's policy of never ask a question in court unless you already know what the answer is. And Michael kept on going about the 4 for 8.5 question, and I really didn't dare ask.
What does that mean?
I didn't. Well, that's the point. I didn't dare ask what it was because
The building of Victorian railway standards.
Yeah, and when Aidan, Paul then said 4 foot 8.5. What's the question between two horses' arse and the space shuttle?
Oh yes.
I really knew that I didn't want to know what the question was. And then, as Lloyd obviously said, well, clearly everyone knows it's to do with the width of Roman carts going into
Same as train tracks.
Train tracks, yeah.
The standardisation of train tracks so that they could be built all over the country. Yeah,
I should have known that.
I do recall that Brunel wanted to go to 6 feet, and
right.
there were all sorts of advantages to that as far as he was concerned,
right.
but it never happened. But now, kind of Boyd, 1 with a cup of tea, and 2 with a slightly greater knowledge of what was going on, I'd be interested to know what Michael thought the 8.5.
James,
Carolyn,
everybody
yes.
can hear us. Everybody can hear us, by the way.
Indeed.
Just talking about horses' bottoms is a, unusual one for us, James. Not unusual for us, but.
And Rob just muted you halfway through. I get that feeling. Was it you, Rob? Or did you just mute yourself? Rob's insisting it was nothing to do with him.
No.
Okay, well, we are... Oh, hold on, we've got... We've got more discussion on the. I was going to say the horses, but.
Oh, yeah. Shall we move on to Rural?
Let's move on, shall we? That last debate was a bit of a challenge for me because there are all sorts of questions that I wanted to ask and progress, and that's going to get worse because rural is my thing. But that's down to the panel. So we've got some interesting issues here. So clearly DCMS, they are looking at the rural agenda, the Outside In program. Everyone's getting excited about the Outside In program. It hasn't even started yet. So we're going to have some presentations on that and then move to the same format of a debate on the issues of delivering rural. So Carolyn, over to you for the keynote speech. I believe you've got the presentation on your machine, is that right?
No, I'm just talking today. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me. Can everybody hear me okay? Just give us a thumbs up.
We can hear you but you're probably going to try and keep your head reasonably still. I think that's going to work better.
Is that better?
Yeah, yes. Sorry about that.
A little bit crackly, but carry on.
Yeah. Is it crackly?
No, that was worse.
It was worse. You're losing half of every word, Carolyn.
Yeah.
It might be a connection.
James? Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. No, I haven't done a slide deck today. I am going to talk through, there's a couple of points I want to talk about today, and I'm also going to link back to a recent speech that we made at a keynote event. And I just thought it was interesting just to give you some context about what's happened in the last few months. Two areas. I'll talk firstly about the wider DCMS response and what's happened in terms of the world of broadband rollout. And then the second point I'm going to talk about is the 5-day plan programme and just give you a couple of headlines on the UK fibre programme. So, starting off, just first, thank everybody for number one, inviting me, and number two, we want to thank the industry for the work it's done during the COVID-19 outbreak. And I think as well, we just want to reassure people that the government is continuing to prioritise the policy work on gigabit broadband despite the now COVID-19 outbreak. And we just want to set out some initial thoughts about the impact that it's had on gigabit rollout. So point number one, so I started there by saying thank you for all the work you've been doing, helping to keep the country working and helping to keep children learning and keep people in contact with their families and socialise, mainly as you can see through virtual quizzes.
Karen, we're struggling to hear you.
Yeah.
Hold on, we're struggling to hear you. Slightly oddly, your audio seems to work best when you're looking out the window. Look the other way.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. I'm looking at the window.
No, I think you need to look to the side of your computer just slightly. It's clipping out when you speak to you're too close.
Okay, I'm not sure
That's
what the speaker is on this. Okay, so your organisations have stepped up quickly and generously, and you've committed to providing extra support to NHS consumers, and particularly the most vulnerable at this current time. You've worked quickly and collaboratively with us to deliver your efforts, and it's very much appreciated. That Melissa and her Telecoms COVID Hub will continue to provide you with the support that you need. They've already helped to mitigate the impact on the industry by designating telecoms workers as key workers and issuing guidance for local authorities and landowners, as well as endorsing industry guidance on street works. We stand ready to do more if necessary, and we are particularly focused on stopping mindless attacks on telecoms infrastructure. So point number two, so what can I tell you about the quality work on gigabit broadband? I just want to reassure you that nationwide...
Hold on, no, Carolyn, I think, I mean, I'm getting a load of questions, chat coming in saying that we're having real problems hearing you.
Hang on, we dialed in on the mobile.
Yeah,
if you wouldn't
dial in on mobile, that'd be better. You'll have to mute your laptop once you've dialed in, just to avoid echo. So we ask the panel to introduce themselves and get ready on video.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea. So we'll get the panel ready, and then we'll get back to Carolyn. So Tom, I see you there. Good afternoon.
Yep.
Hello, how are you?
Tom's there. Michael,
Tom from
Evan.
Barn, I'm COO,
and
we're deploying in the rural northwest predominantly.
Okay, Michael.
Yeah, Michael Armitage, founder, chairman, and chief exec of Broadway Partners Rural ISP.
Okay. Nick.
Nick McCormick, Lothian Broadband. We are in the southeast of Scotland, delivering fixed wireless and full fibre connections.
And Evan.
Good afternoon. I'm Evan from TrueSpeed, and pretty much like everybody else, delivering active Ethernet across Somerset.
Cool. Carolyn, are you back with us? Hold on. Try again, Carolyn.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hold on, that right. Try again. Carolyn, speak to us.
Just put yourself on mute, perhaps.
Try again.
Can you hear me okay, James?
Yeah.
We can hear you okay, but oddly through your computer. But carry on. Carry on. Yes.
No, honestly.
No, yeah.
No, it doesn't matter. Carry on.
Carry on.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's clear.
Okay, sorry about this. So, second point I wanted to reassure you is about the key priority for the government, and that we are continuing to take forward the changes that you need to deploy faster broadband at scale quickly. So in terms of the work of the barrier busting team, we are looking at the second reading for the Lords, having completed its common stages. And in March, we confirmed our intention to legislate to ensure that new build homes come with gigabit connectivity from the outset. And we will lay this legislation as soon as parliamentary time allows. The team continues to work with the Department for Transport on potential reforms to the streetworks regime to make the administration involved in this process easier for you all. In terms of broader work, we are continuing engaging with Ofcom for their market review for 21 to 26, and in particular to ensure good alignment between their proposals for less competitive areas with our 5 billion procurement strategy, which I'll mention more about later.
DCMS launched the 30 million 5G Create competition in April, and it's part of the 200 million 5G testbeds and trials programme, and the deadline for responses was Monday. We continue working on the telecoms security requirements and the new telecom security legislation, and we remain committed to laying this in Parliament before summer recess. And finally, published a call for evidence on the access to infrastructure regulations soon, and these regulations are intended to make it easier for broadband firms to access passive infrastructure to deploy broadband networks, but the UK's reuse of utility infrastructure for broadband deployment remains much lower than in some other European countries. We want to see if there is anything we can do to improve this situation by amending the existing regulations. So the third point I wanted to just briefly run through is some facts and figures for you. So did you know that build rates were clearly beginning to scale up significantly before the current social distancing measures were implemented? Think Broadband March's estimate was that full fibre coverage had reached 13%, compared to Ofcom's figure of 10% from September 2019, and that gigabit-capable coverage was over 18%. They also estimated that the industry have deployed around 625,000 full fibre connections in the first 3 months of 2020, and this equates to an annual build rate of 2.5 million premises a year, compared to the 1.5 million premises estimated by Ofcom in 2019. However, clearly COVID-19 is going to have an impact on build. However, the action that the government has taken in terms of designating telecom workers as key workers, issuing guidance to local authority and landlords, has helped mitigate the potential impact. We also hope any impact will be relatively short-term and limited in the context of the ambition that runs to 2025, but we are working with some of the key operators to get more regular build data from them so the government is better informed in real time. If anybody would like to share their build data with us regularly, please let us know. We have a draft NDA ready to go. Investors seem relatively positive about the prospects for the broadband market, although share prices have obviously fallen. But the positive investor sentiment is not that surprising, given that broadband as a sector is exposed as others to the crisis, and as such, telecom revenues are likely to be more resilient. There may be some positives from the current crisis for telecoms. For example, people's current reliance on broadband may increase their importance they place on it, on a higher quality broadband connection. Hence, I shouldn't have moved to Virgin. And people will start thinking about increased more working from home, even after the current social distancing measures are relaxed. The sector could also play a key role in helping some of our fellow citizens back to employment, and we have been talking to the Department for Work and Pensions about this. However, we are not complacent, and we appreciate this is an unprecedented, uncertainty time, and particularly with the long-term impacts it could have on the economy and the effects for the telecom sector. So we've been monitoring this closely. My last point from a policy perspective is you are thinking about broadband deployment in the sector more widely. We would like to think about your thoughts. If you do have any thoughts on what I've just presented, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me so we can feed that into our telecoms team. Moving on to the next section. So I'm just about to talk for a few minutes about the government's intention to achieve the nationwide gigabit ambition, both in terms of what we're already doing, but also our plans for deploying the 5 billion of public funds announced to achieve this target. And by we in this instance, I mean Building Digital UK, which is a part of DCMS responsible for delivering the programme using public funding to achieve government's digital infrastructure ambitions. So first, the existing programmes. BD UK began pivoting the Superfast programme. That's the £1.7 billion programme to extend UK Superfast coverage towards gigabit solutions. And almost all of our network coverage is now being built in full fibre. And the programme has passed over 400,000 premises to date in the very hardest to reach areas of the UK with full fibre. And we have even more in procurement and are currently contracting this year. It's about 12 new OJUs. Through the local full fibre programme and the rural gigabit programme, we've been buying gigabit connectivity to hundreds of public sector buildings like primary schools and GP surgeries, encouraging operators to build an extensive presence in these areas as a launch pad for further commercial build. We also launched a voucher scheme to help residents and SME businesses buy gigabit capable connections. There are nearly 400 suppliers active on the scheme, and more suppliers are aggregating these vouchers, extending their commercial bill to fulfil this demand. About 9,000 vouchers have been issued so far. And moving on to the new programme, most of you will be aware that the Chancellor committed $5 billion of funding to extend gigabit-capable networks, and we're currently designing the programme and preparing the business case for funding. Subject to us providing advice to ministers, we are planning several changes from our original intervention in superfast coverage that builds on our learning from the past decade. Firstly, DCMS has conducted modelling of which parts of the UK are more likely to get commercial investment in gigabit-capable networks, and our funding will target the 20% of UK premises that are not expected to receive these services without public funding. And within these, we would want to prioritise the hardest to get to premises, i.e. the ones with the worst speeds, rather than being at the end of the queue, again, in this next cycle of investment. And secondly, we're anticipating using several complementary interventions approaches in parallel, rather than just procurements. In particular, we'd expect to continue with our demand-led approaches, such as upgrading public sector hub sites and granting vouchers to residents and SMEs. Suppliers have told us that this would harness more of the existing market activity to help deliver in the hardest to reach area. Nevertheless, procurements will again play a major role in the delivery of the programme, and this is where most of our work has been focused to date. Work is progressing well. We are in the middle of a detailed design and development process, and thanks to you that have been feeding your thoughts to us at the various points we continue to develop and consult on the approach so far. In the next months, we will present our latest thinking to the market and local stakeholders again. And as most of you will be aware, we've launched a seminar on the 23rd of June for suppliers and local bodies on the 9th of June, and we've just started consultation with the DAs over the content of those seminars first. So we want to approach this new approach to complement our existing commercial and your existing commercial investments. We will shape our procurement in a way that should be more attractive to bidders, include moving towards smaller, shorter-term contracts for coverage that match the industry's normal units of build, and conclude quickly before the local market changes significantly. We will be transparent about our planned pipeline of procurements and consult suppliers to understand their planned activity so we can regularly reappraise areas which need our funding and adapt the sequencing of procurements so they can be matched to local market capacity and interest. Secondly, we are designing a simpler, more efficient procurement approach that should mean a lower hurdle for those who want to bid. The new procurement system, which is a dynamic purchasing system, will be administered centrally by BDUK and will enable prospective bidders to register their organisation and solution once at any time in the pipeline to be able to participate in future call-offs. If I could just get a plug-in too, that we also have a new dynamic purchasing system, RN 6095, for gigabit-capable broadband connections to buildings. We intend the procurements for the supply-side intervention to be centrally procured by BDUK, and this enables us to increase automation and speed up the contracting process. This represents a change in the historic role of local authorities. However, this enables our local partners to focus instead on supporting delivery of both commercial and public investments and maximising local benefits. We need local people to support local suppliers, facilitate delivery, barrier busting and stimulating community demands. And we also are talking to local authorities about how our process can maximise their involvement in our central procurement process. In terms of timelines, we are on track to deliver the first procurements by the end of this year, and we're building up our first procurement pipeline. Call-ups will happen soon, within the next year, and we will validate the locations of our first round of procurements with the market soon. If anybody has any questions, happy to hand back. I've tried to write as much as I can rather than talking through slides to present as much as I can back to you, and also try to give you a feel that this is how we see the organisation moving towards, as James described, the rural and the places that we might not get to. Hope that was useful.
Thank you, Carolyn. Right, now hopefully
any questions,
this is going to work with the audio to you. But let's go. Tom, I'd kind of like to get to you because obviously you have a very, very a well-known different approach in Barn.
Indeed,
where,
yes.
You went to really quite a rural area, but took no government funding, at least to start off with. So is that £5 billion
Yeah, I mean, essentially we started when it was a different environment, and you know, since then we've built up a critical mass, which you know, has allowed us to engage with DCMS and the voucher funding, which is working quite well. You know, ultimately, you know, we're deploying in deep rural northwest. There are other areas too that we're deploying into, but you know, significantly for us, it's all of the deep rural. They're really hard to get. And I think some of the significant problems is going to be actually getting there for some operators. You know, going down the roads in street works just does not work in the deep rural areas. So you have to have absolute commitment from the local communities, which is what we harness to be able to reach agreement quickly to deploy network. And you know, we have been working very well with DCMS and the voucher scheme to actually accelerate this build in our areas. And you know, I think the next round of funding that's coming through, you know, that will further allow us and other operators to, you know, increase the build rate, because ultimately, if we carry on the build rate overall in the UK in the deep rural, currently as it's going to take forever. So there needs to be a fundamental change, and I do believe that DCMS has got the answer here, well, part of the answer for making this happen. Now, clearly, in the rural areas, you're still going to need investment to make this happen. And at the moment, we're able to harness local community investment in order to build a package that allows us to deliver. And yeah, I don't know how this would, how others would make this scale in the UK, but certainly we're absolutely going as fast as we can in the Northwest here.
Right, that's an interesting issue. So we've got Barn going as fast as they can. I'd like to just have comments from the other panelists in terms of, there's one fundamental thing, isn't there? We've delivered, what, 97, 98% of superfast broadband so far in the last 10 years. So in the next 5 years, we want to deliver 100% of gigabit. The interesting thing about the superfast broadband is it largely didn't require a new access network. It was able to use BT's existing copper access network. I can't remember the exact figures that I worked out on a few different areas, but let's go about 80%. 80% of the new fibre will be in that access network, because the access network is where it all fans out, so you get a lot more fibre there than you do in the kind of the core network. So roughly speaking, we've got 4 times as much build to do in delivering to an access network as you have in the core that's already been delivered for the superfast. So we've got 4 times as much work spread over a bigger area and half as much time to do it. What are we going to do? Evan, you're looking suitably puzzled.
No, thank you, James. I hope everybody's okay and that the families and etc. are all safe. It's crazy times, but busy. We've never been more busy, and we've never been more at it. I think working from home, working on Zoom, having a really competent team who predominantly who are on net and have great internet. I mean, I'm in the rurals, and I'm sitting here with brilliant internet, and that's testament to the fact that it can be done.
And an office cat, I see, which is good to see.
Actually, a panther.
It's obviously further away than I thought.
It's massive. He bullies his way around. Leave my cat alone. He always takes a long night. But yeah. So look, delivering into the rurals can be done. It should have been done already. It hasn't been done, and the competition into the country to bring out this process of delivering more fibre to the property is happening because of companies at this conference and others. Okay, if it wasn't for the competition that we've generated, there wouldn't be any more than the FTTC delivered, and BT would be putting up a fight to need lots and lots of government subsidy to deliver it, or Openreach would anyway. So here we are in this position, and actually from a discussion piece, there's a lot for BDUK and Ofcom to be dealing with around how this happens. Malcolm's comments earlier were really interesting, actually. I mean, why does BT need assistance from Ofcom to move off its copper network? It either wants to move off its copper network or it doesn't. It either has to move off its copper network because the competition is taking all its customers away, or BT Retail moves over to the other network that makes sense for it to be at. And the regulatory environment that we're in right now seems very biased towards Openreach, and Openreach are telling people a lot of things that aren't true about the competition required to give them all the assistance they require. So the point I'm making is that actually myself and others in this room right now are paying a lot of attention and spending a lot of time having to defend against possibility of sneaky legislation that's going to make it easy for BT Openreach to come and destroy the competition effectively going forward, and that's very important that we make sure that doesn't happen. We can go as fast as you like. It is a funding related issue, and it's a confidence related issue. The funding's there and the confidence is there, and we growing month on month to deliver more and more. So, you know, from humble beginnings, we're going to pass 40,000 properties by the end of the year, and with a much bigger deliverable the following year. Unlike Barn, I think we deliver both to the rurals, to the semi-rurals, and to the urban in the rural areas. So we're building a regional network, not just filling in the gaps, if that makes sense. So it makes more sense for a wholesaler to want to come over to us at some point. And of course, being Active Ethernet, we are completely software defined. So making that transition between or providing a wholesale product is pretty straightforward from our perspective. We made that decision when we chose the technology right from the very beginning. But I do think we are, as a country, capable of delivering at speed. And I do think the regulatory environment needs to pay attention, really pay attention to ensuring that I don't like using the word altnets, is that the other companies delivering full fiber networks and connected very happy customers aren't disadvantaged by the incumbent and the messaging that it puts out.
Okay, Michael, you recently had some interesting announcements in terms of ambition and scale. Your views?
Yes, indeed. Nothing like setting a stretch target for the team. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Great pleasure to be here, and thanks very much for giving me the slot. I have to apologise for the non-presence of my colleague Barry Weaver, who's the original invitee. He for domestic reasons had to call off at the last minute, so I'm the very poor substitute for him. You would have got the technology spin from Barry. You'll get the usual Michael Armitage waffle instead. So what are my takes are hats off to DCMS and Carolyn and her team for embracing the voucher schemes and putting the purchasing power into the hands of the consumer, and that's all very good. We've all, I guess, had our struggles with the voucher scheme, but it's been a generally beneficial experience to get through the registration process and understand the wheres and the why-fors. The obvious question I have, which I'm sure we all have, maybe it's been answered and I just missed the answer, but what on earth happens to it after next March? If I heard you right, Carolyn, that 9,000 vouchers have been issued, that certainly doesn't mean that 9,000 have been redeemed. But I mean, that adds up to around £18 million worth of voucher value, which by my calculations is around 10% of the pot. So I'm just wondering what's happening to all the rest post-March, because we've certainly got the demand to soak up an awful lot of that 200 or 180 million pounds that's left over. So that'd be a quick question for Carolyn. I'm sure it's a very easy one to answer. Second point I'd make is, I mean, it's only just come to me, and it's a slightly spurious one, but all this talk about two horses, arses, and trains, and Brunel was a hero, and rightly so. But by golly, if all he had to compete against was two horses, and the simplicity of the business model and the technology relatively to deliver nationwide rail infrastructure, I mean, clearly it was a heroic effort and achievement. But compared to the complexity of the industry that we operate in, and the multiple stakeholder interests, the highly complex and dynamic regulation, the highly complex and dynamic government participation. I mean, I think if we get to 100% fibre or gigabit capable by 2025, I think we certainly deserve to pat ourselves on the back, because it will be an heroic achievement on a par with industrialization in the 18th and 19th century. There we go. That's my little take on that. Final point is the dynamic purchasing system. Unfortunately, I personally missed the supplier engagement process in February. So I'm really looking forward to the second bite of the cherry later this month, because I mean, I've got, you know, the one concern, this is an old hobby horse of mine, is it's not just the implication of a sort of single purchaser, which complicates things or just defines the nature of the solution. It's the fact that the grant funding model is central to government thinking. And you've heard me on this before, but there are so many different financing models. I'm sure this will be discussed in the next panel as well. But you know, the co-investment model, we're about to announce with a council a co-investment scheme whereby the council will be investing in a special purpose vehicle for the provision of a gigabit infrastructure across the whole county, from which will hang, you know, 1,000 points of light, if not 10 or 20,000 points of light. And it's a classic co-investment model whereby you know, it's done on commercial terms, market equivalent, non-state aid triggering. Everybody's happy. The council are stakeholders. They've got skin in the game, and it's you know, on paper we've obviously got to deliver it, but on paper it's an everybody's a winner type setup. And I just urge DCMS to consider alternatives to the single grant funding or gap funding model. Not that we don't like free money, but we all know that free money always comes with complications. So that's my opening gambit.
Right. Thank you very much. Carolyn, do you want to just respond to the question about vouchers?
Yeah, there's a couple of questions that have come in as well.
Can you just respond specifically to the vouchers one? Because there's Nick to come next, and I'd like him to sort of do his bit.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So we are looking at the two types of model that we're looking at within the outline business case, and there is a supply side intervention and a demand side intervention. So there are two types of interventions that we're looking at, and that's a supply side intervention and a demand side intervention, and we'll be going out to explain more about what that means late June.
Fantastic. Okay. Thank you, Karen.
Nick.
Thanks, James. I think echo a lot of the points made across the panel so far. That I think that the move towards the demand-led voucher schemes through the remote rural is a great idea. Pushing the control and the power into the consumers really works in the area. I think on the back of some of the comments that Evan made, I think that now is the time to build and fast, and I think it's up to us to get on and do that. And then leverage the various support models that come through from government and or other local authorities, and also other funds that come through. But I think one of the real key points is just the opportunity is now, and we should start making the most of it where we can. For us, it's about getting past the premises at the right cost point. Now, what that distance means, whether it's going down a road or whether it's negotiating with a local community, which I think we all do, and is a part of what we all have to do to make our businesses successful, is negotiating with those local communities. If that's the cheaper route and option, then that's the best way we should be working towards doing it, and that's what we do well. But I think that, yeah, I think generally we've got the atmosphere to make it work and hit some of these high targets. But yeah, I think, as Michael said, it'll be very, very difficult to achieve 2025, but it'll be a great big pat on our back.
Okay. An interesting question is just coming from Rob Skinner. Something that I have to admit I've been wondering for a little while. So, to Carolyn, how does the 20% of the UK that came out in the FTIR to be uneconomic for anyone to build without funding compared to the Area 3 in Ofcom's WFTMR consultation? Should they not be identical?
Sorry, James, it was a question. Sorry, I was trying to come off mute from off mute on two devices. Sorry. The
FTIR talks about 20%, where Rob says that that's uneconomical. I think actually it's 20% can only support one infrastructure, and half of that, so roughly 10%, is uneconomical without funding. How does that compare to Ofcom's Area 3 in the WFTMR?
I'd have to double check the answer to that one, James. I'm not sure I could answer that one off the cuff. Let me take that question away and I'll come back to you on that one. I'd need to double check.
Okay, I mean, it will be interesting. I'll just give a little bit more depth in that, because I've done some analysis of, okay, where is the last 20%, where is the last 30% in terms of properties, and it will vary between supplier to supplier. But the interesting thing is, of course, that the last 20% of properties occupies approximately 80% of the land mass of the UK. And the interesting thing is, if you look at the last 30%, it's very little different in terms of area. We're talking about a very similar area.
I think Area 3 works on a different methodology. So I think that Ofcom works on a postcode basis, and it considers the different access networks and multiple service access networks. I'm just Googling this for the level of competition. So yes, I think it is basically that we are defining our final 20% at premise level, so UPRN level detail. But I'll double check the answer to that one for you, James. Sorry, I'm a bit vague on that one.
Okay, because obviously, as we're starting to see, there's an issue of DCMS helping to enable the rollout of networks in particularly in rural areas, and particularly over the next few years. But then we're kind of like handing over to Ofcom to make sure they're sustainable. And I think we need to get increasingly the two of those lined up, so when people are building their networks, they know they're sustainable.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed.
We've got
one other question was about two payments cash flow strain. I can't answer the question. Yeah, but the RGs, the Rural Gigabit Voucher Scheme will end in March 2021, because the Rural Gigabit Connectivity Programme runs to March 2021. So that's all I can say on the RGC programme. RGC programme was a test or a pilot for the outside in, and the idea was that we would test working in the final 10% with the hub model in rural areas, but just targeting solely rural, hard to reach areas, and the vouchers were targeting rural areas too. As you can see now, there's been a big upturn in the number of vouchers, so I think it's really positive. That I appreciate it takes time for people to mobilise these networks and build these networks, and I really do think that as we see the scheme moving forward in this year, I think it will start to gain some real traction and growth.
Yeah, and there's a couple of other questions, probably more for you, Carolyn.
Okay.
There's one here from Scott that says previous presentations on 2021 strategy, it was only going to be 2 payments to a supplier. I think we're talking about the vouchers again, therefore causing cash flow strain. Is this still the case, and what is the view of the contractor market about this? Okay, so maybe more a wider question, but is it something you're aware of and comment on?
I don't know. I don't understand the context of the question. So can I take that one away, Scott, and I'll happily come back to you on that one?
Yeah.
I've just been referred to Michael Aldridge. I've just been refreshing my own thinking on the dynamic pricing scheme. Looking at the slides from February, and I think that 2 payment thing is very specifically in relation to with an average size of 3,300 premises per lot, the expectation is that there is 2 payments, one at the end of the sort of initial survey stage and one at the end of completion. And I think that's where the question's coming from, isn't it?
I'd have to check and take that away. I'm not certain.
Okay. Question from David Cullen. Does F20 operating at UPRN level mean that the scheme will also include prems in urban and rural, given the digitally deprived business location?
Good question.
Urban. That is a good question. So I mean, we've all been talking about the last few percent and assuming that they're rural. I recently had someone come to me, a new housing build in the middle of Burton-on-Trent. They couldn't get broadband. So there are significant problems even in rural areas. What's it going to cover?
I can't say yet, so I'll dodge the question on that one. Sorry, Dave, I dodged that one. But it's something that I talk a lot, as most people know, to lots of local authorities, and it's a common problem that when we run our F10, F20 checks for some not just rural areas, but we find that there is as many F10 in urban areas as there is in, not as many, but predominantly more in the rural areas, but there is areas of F10 that are, you know, like whatever you want to call them, not spots, areas where there is, as Dave alludes to there, poor connectivity. So it is something that we are aware of.
Okay, thanks. Got a question here from Philip Virgo. I think it's Philip Virgo. It just says Virgo. I'm assuming that's you, Philip. It's the question around skills gaps. Yeah. So does, I guess, you know, from a DCMS perspective, but also from an operator perspective or a contractor perspective, what are the views on skills gaps? Is it a growing problem?
Yeah, I think if you could, who's written that question, I've just put a message on there. Could you message me about that offline, and we could happily pick that up with the, could you pick it up with me separately? Yeah. That's a really, really good question, and I'd like to capture that if I could and refer that to our policy team and to the wider resilience team as well. So if you could, please, would you send that in to us so we can answer that question, and we'll share the answers with whoever's on the call today.
Thanks. And it'd be useful to get the panelists' views on whether they see there being a skills gap at the moment or in the future. Anyone got any comments
on that just briefly? If that's all right.
Yeah, sure.
You know, essentially what we're trying to do here really isn't rocket science, with the greatest of respect. I think, you know, from our point of view, we're actually bringing in young farmers and actually training them on trenching techniques and how to build, even as far as blowing and splicing fibre. And actually it's working that we have a program where we're not, you know, requiring people to come in with all the industry certificates and have had, you know, years and years experience deploying fiber, because it's different. You know, the core backbone that's being built already is a bit different to, you know, connecting two fiber into properties. It's a little bit different. Same technology, same fiber, but actually we found that we can bring people through with no prior experience, but are very motivated and hands-on, and get them out there working. You know, so from our point of view, I don't think there's a skills gap problem from now into the future in the way that we're deploying. A bit different if you're working on street works, obviously, because you need the accreditation there. But certainly, you know, working in the deep rural areas, I don't see that there's a big problem there. That's just my thoughts and my
I would tend to endorse that in our work in Wales and Scotland. We're finding that there's no shortage of civils contractors to work with. I mean, whether it's a temporary phenomenon, COVID related, because BT's not putting the work out at the moment, I don't know. But for the moment, we don't see a supply shortage.
Well, I can say that we do foresee a skills gap coming forward. The acceleration and the ramp up in build is palpable. And I have to say that I think Brexit is going to make that harder. It hasn't made it harder yet, but it will make it harder to bring in the skills we need. It's the more technical skills, as Michael said. You know, digging roads is digging roads, but actually there's lots of digging of roads that need to happen. There's those skills as well, and everybody looks for those to be lower skills than those, but they're not. They are trained people who know what they're doing. There's TM. There's a bunch of stuff that needs to happen safely. You know, safely, and more safely. So there are issues that are along with that. So we're taking the approach of having a mixed bunch of technicians in our company, and so we have people who've been doing it a long time, and we're mixing them up with youngsters who we are putting through training to obviously learn the skills on the job and elsewhere, and then treating them well enough so that they don't want to leave when they become qualified.
Nick, any thoughts? You'll need to unmute.
Apologies. Yeah, I agree with Evan on that one. I think that there is a risk. I think that there will be a skills shortage that comes through. That quality there is and the wisdom that comes with the skill of good operatives is necessary. From my construction background, a good digger driver was worth their weight in gold. If you've got a good one, they'll do great work. If you've got a bad one, they'll cause you headaches. So I think the skill side of things is really, really important, and it is on our radar that there's potentially a shortage in the scale up of work required.
Yeah, a slightly sort of the harsh comment to Carolyn. The bit that concerns me this time is that I suppose it sort of comes back to what Michael was saying, but in a slightly different way. Is that the gap funding model? There's sort of more to it than that, because we've got to see such a ramp up in terms of capability to deploy this network that I think it's more than sort of offer lots and lots of money and stand back and hope for the best. There are so many other things. The skills gap, I think, is the big final one. There are lots of other sort of things like that. Oh yeah, we need a wholesale platform because we've got to be able to offer that interoperability in the end, because we're doing it on such a scale. You've got to get backhaul networks out. You've got to do all sorts of things. You've got to, you know, align the access network. There are lots of complications, but in the end, if we haven't got enough people to just dig and deploy, it still is not going to happen. And I'm just concerned that just chucking even £5 billion, which will probably free up another £30 billion of commercial funding, it's still just not enough.
Can I just come in here? I mean, in my view, you know, from a commercial perspective, it's my responsibility to ensure I've got trained people to do the work I need them to do. And we talk about those skills gap and all the other things. Well, you know, if we want to build networks and we know there's a skills gap coming up, you know, the networks themselves, we've got to step up and train people to do the work that we need them to do. You know, if I opened up a restaurant in London, I'd find it very hard to find, you know, a Michelin-starred chef to come and work for me. It's the same thing. You know, there's work that needs to be done by us, and I think we should stop looking to others to say this is how it's going to be done, because we're responsible for building. And yet the government can turn around and say we have an ambition to get to this many properties passed by the end of such and such. You know, there is a skills gap, and all of the commercial entities out there doing their best to deliver as much as we possibly can in the shortest possible time can't do it because we haven't got enough people. There's no magic wand that's going to fix that for us by elsewhere. So we've got to have a throughput of training and bringing people through to do the work that we need, and that will happen when the demand is there for that. And the demand is there, and therefore, you know, we're taking steps to make it better. Whether we make it perfect is another story. But if we're expecting the government to somehow produce a university of infrastructure building stuff and to deliver 100,000, you know, people onto the, you know, into our laps to put, it's not going to happen. And I don't think we should pretend that it should.
Fair point.
Fair point. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, if I could just reiterate the comments of Evan there. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, the model is right, I believe. You're saying you're partnering people up with, you know, newbies against people who are experienced and get them trained up. I think you're right. It's up to us as the people deploying that we bring new people in and train them. Obviously, safety is key, and the quality of installation is key. But what we're finding is that there's groundworks contractors in the deep rural areas all over the place, and you know, they've not worked with rural broadband in this sense before. You know, they've been doing drainage, all sorts of other different things, and they can be skilled up to work in private land, which is predominantly what we're doing right now. Appreciate Streetworks is different, but you know, as a model of deployment, we are bringing these people in, training them up, and getting to the position where they can go and build themselves. And it's a case of the people are there, so it's just training them up internally. And I do agree that I think it's up to us to start making this happen right now.
Okay, I think that sounds like a really good last word, Carolyn. Unless you want, unless you want to make any final comments, Carolyn.
No, I thought it was really encouraging, though. I did take down a couple of points that people made throughout the session, and I thought there were some really positive comments as well. So, you know, and I think that's something, I think that I love what Michael said there, we're giving purchasing power to the consumer. That was a really good way of putting it with the vouchers. I never thought about it, took a complete step back. And actually, sorry, Michael, yeah, that's my quote of the day today. I thought that was a really interesting quote. So no, thank you so much, everybody. And as I said, we've got the supplier webinars on the 23rd of June, and we are obviously looking and hopefully share more information with you then.
Okay, thank you very much, Carolyn.
Just to add to that supplier webinar, there are two, aren't there, Carolyn? One on the 23rd, one on the 30th. Slightly different one's a procurement process, and then contractual terms and conditions one. Inca has sent out, I believe, a mailer to all of its members or people on the mailing list with those links. If you haven't received it and you still want it, please contact one of us, Jill, James, or myself, for those links, and we'll forward them on for you.
Okay, thanks, Rob. We rather strayed, I think, on that sort of discussion of rural, as everything does at the moment, into the whole issue of deployment. But that's the final sort of topic that we want to get to, because with deployment comes, well, funding and just where are we getting to. So we have a slight different approach to the next one. We've got Oliver Johnson from Point Topic, who's going to just sort of do a summary of where we've got to on this, and then we'll go into the final panel discussion on that. So, Oliver, are you there? Indeed, there you are.
Yes, hopefully you can hear me and see me.
Yes, we can. Yes.
I can see my hairstyle as well, so apologies for the lockdown.
Yeah, I've got all COVID cuts, and that's just accepted now. Has to be. I've got the same problem, different anyway.
Yes, so as James said, I'm going to just give you hopefully share a screen and give you a quick view on some of the stats and bits and pieces in the background behind all this. And it was good to hear Caroline quoting Think Broadband, and they are indeed partners of ours. And hopefully, James, everybody can see the slide.
Yep.
Good. And indeed, Think Broadband and Andrew Ferguson, OBE, actually provide a pretty much the canonical regular update on this. Caroline referred to some stats from, I think it was March or April possibly. But this slide here shows you where we are at the end as of Sunday, I think this was. And I'd encourage you to go to labs.thinkbroadband.com if you want to dig through the data. There's lots of ways of cutting this and looking at this, but full fibre you can see up at just about 14%, and then the gigabit pretty close to 20% actually, but it's likely to be past that pretty much now. There is always a bit of a lag with some of these stats. It can take a little bit of time for us to catch up with some of the announcements, but nonetheless it does show some pretty positive progress. It's also interesting to see the estimated maximum mean download speed, and this is one that annoys some people and is actually quite a useful metric otherwise, but it's essentially an indication of if you took the theoretical maximums, and this is calculated as well, we've done the proper signal to noise ratio calculations on the GFAST and FTTC and ADSL, but if you add in the Virgin Media and the FTTP and other broadbands, you get 372 megabits per second on average available. So yes, labs.thinkbroadband.com will give you plenty to go through. In terms of actual adoption, well, there's plenty of detailed stats you can go and have a look at. And indeed, we did for Inca quite recently a report that helps collate some of the information sets that are out there in terms of how many subscribers and where the investment is from. And a couple of the slides to come will actually show that. But just some of these numbers are from our Point Topics most recent release. And to the end of March, we're looking at 20 million plus super fast and ultra fast line numbers out there in the market. Doesn't necessarily mean everybody is subscribing to ultra fast bandwidth, but obviously the capability is an important benchmark in itself. And this does actually fold in all the operators. So that's and again, here we are, another nice milestone, 75% effectively now. Will have available to them or subscribe to something that is capable of super fast and or ultra fast services. Within that, there's lots of breakdowns, and obviously we can take some more detailed questions offline, but have a look at the Point Topics site if you want, or you can ask us questions. In this context, we'll try and get back to you. But as I mentioned, we did pull together some stats in cooperation with Inca and all their lovely members earlier in the year. And you can see that on the Inca site at AltNet Full Fibre Growth. Follow that link. In fact, this link was supposed to be on this page. And this gives you, this is a breakdown of an infographic that we actually published along with this report, and just gives you an indication of some of the comparisons. So you can see the sort of progression in terms of premises passed and connections. This is for the independent network, alternative network universe, so to speak. So you can see that's starting to not necessarily accelerate in this context, but certainly build up quite quickly. And in fact, what does seem to be significantly accelerating is, is the number of premises passed. And you can actually see the percentage change growing quite quickly. And if that sort of thing is going to be replicated and that sort of growth is going to go on, yeah, a lot of the altnets are going to meet their targets. CityFibre talking about 5 million odds, and Broadway with their announcements adding to the numbers. So there's a lot of will out there. There is quite a lot of progress. And again, it was interesting, Caroline and others talking about some of the COVID impacts on deployment. In fact, in the data, we haven't seen significant downturn yet. We are only getting the April-May. I'll get the end of May data pretty shortly. That won't necessarily reflect, or it might just start to reflect the impact of the COVID, because, as I said, it takes a little bit of time sometimes to catch up with some of the announcements. But the feedback is, so far from the stats, it's smooth progression. That's an evolving story. From just talking to people on the grounds, yes, there have been delays, but the enthusiasm is certainly increasing. And while some of the local authority projects have moved back a bit, and there are resource issues around just access to legal resource in terms of who gets to sign off which contract and issue which wayleave. So there are plenty of barriers left to pass, but it is definitely moving forward. Is it moving forward fast enough to meet the overall targets and everything else? Well, statistically, you'd have to say no at this point. At least certainly no to 2025 FTTH everywhere. Gigabit everywhere by 2025. That might be possible. Certainly, there's plenty of will. Again, I think it depends slightly on the definitions of what ultimately ends up being a service that fulfills the gigabit requirements. Definitions can, in these contexts, be quite elastic. You know, the European Commission and its member states were very keen to meet their digital agenda targets in 2012, and satellite eventually played a larger part in that than I think some people were expecting, partly because it gets to those areas that other places cannot necessarily reach. So that's just my you know, if you do the maths, okay, it's just not going to be 100% in that time scale. And you've got a lot of operators, BT, talking about 20 million odd premises in the mid to late decade. And if you indeed stack up everybody's announcements, you do get a very big number. But of course, then we get to the competition and overbuild issue. And we can actually see the altnets themselves starting to overbuild each other. And this is end of April data. And essentially what this represents is the number of premises in each of these regions that have more than one alternative network that we gather data for. And we're not exhaustive, but we're pretty close. And you can see that, for example, in East Midlands, there's not a huge overbuild going on. London, obviously, here's a nice prime area with lots of premises passed relatively quickly. And with competition like Community Fibre, G-Network, Hyper Optic, along with some others, you are going to see this sort of picture expanding. And in fact, there are starting to appear areas where 3 alternative networks, potentially in addition to Openreach as well, are already available. So it's a nice exercise to stack your numbers and arrive at 28-30 million premises. But the evidence certainly is that people are acting primarily in their commercial interests, be it beside the government intervention, which, as others have said, is great, but perhaps not going to fill in all the gaps. So this market operates according to economic principles, and as do its players, and you're going to see some people going for the same good quality customer base that is already proven, that upgrades and that has money. And just on funding, and I'm very aware that upcoming there are people far more qualified than I am to talk about this. So I'll just report in the readout fashion what we gathered for the Inca report that was recently completed. You can see it on the screen, hopefully yourself. So best part of $750 million was announced during 2019 and early 2020. There obviously is a big number there from CityFibre, 200 million. Part of the issue, in a way, in saying, oh, is this number bigger than the previous number, and does this demonstrate that year on year we're growing, is the fact that we're actually starting to move into the implementation phase. It's not that all the funding in the world is secured, but certainly significant chunks are there. And everybody is now, or a lot of people are now out spending quite a lot of cash. Yes, there are more announcements coming through, and yes, that number is again getting bigger. And then if you look down the bottom there, we're talking about 5.7 billion odd in the sector. And if you talk about Openreach and their number, and then BD UK, the government and their number, it's all sort of in the 15 to 20 billion range. And even on the back of the envelope calculations, that doesn't necessarily unlock everything you need, with a lot of dependency. So that's a brisk canter through. James, I don't know if you want to stop me or interject or hand over to others.
That was excellent. Thank you very much. Some very, very interesting points. Kind of almost too much to deal with, but we'll pick them out one by one, I think. So yes, we've got our panelists starting to materialize who we were looking for. We've got we've got Richard, you're taking from we've got Steve Layton. Yes, we've got Steve, Robert Skinner, Charles Cameron. We had all our panelists. Thank you very much. So
everyone's there.
If you wouldn't mind, panelists, just introducing yourselves and your organizations, and then we'll start having a bit of a discussion. So if we do it from my screen, we've got Rob Skinner first.
Rob Skinner from Octopus Investments. So we're backing Jurassic and Swish. We funded them thus far. We've put £250 million to work in each of them. Hopefully they'll get through that, and we'll keep building more around the UK. But also just generally keen to be backing the fibre sector in the UK. As you say, there's lots of funding that's needed. There's 5 billion from the government out there to try and incentivise the rest of the commercial sector in the UK to build the rest of the UK. We think that driven that penetration, 15 or so % of homes have now passed in the UK with full fibre, isn't the altruism of BT Openreach. It's everyone in this call today who have been building themselves, and actually, as Evan said it earlier, it's the competition that's been created from all the independent operators here that have been helping to build that. We're keen to keep backing firms.
Okay, can we just move on to Alistair? But for Rob, when we get back to you in a moment, if you can try and do something to increase your microphone volume, or just get closer to your microphone, that would be helpful. You've got a few complaints. You're coming through a bit quiet. Alistair.
Hi, Alistair Golden. I'm one of the founders and currently director of Swish Fibre. We, as you know, were acquired by Fern Octopus last year. We currently are in the process of deploying large amounts of capital, as you can see by the picture behind me. And yeah, our passion is to get as much fibre in the ground as possible, and also fibre that can be hooked up very quickly for installations. I think that's a very important thing we need to discuss as well. We're hearing a lot about properties passed, but from my experience, properties connected is the important thing, to try and get people connected or be very close to getting people connected as well. But yeah, thanks for the invite today.
Okay. Next, I've got Charles.
Hi there, good afternoon. So my name's Charles Cameron. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm a partner at a firm called Cameron Barney, and we spend a lot of our time helping a number of companies raise money and try to do so on good terms. Actually, there's a number of participants in this webinar who we've either helped raise money for. So they include GigaClear, ITS, WarwickNet, Community Fibre, G Network, County Broadband, 2 Grain and Swish. I think that's pretty much a reasonable list. But the point is, we are passionate about the sector. We're immodestly, we think we know something about how to raise money, and very, very happy to answer questions.
Okay, there will be more. Richard, do you have you next?
Good afternoon, Inca members. I hope you're well. My name's Richard Jeffers. I'm the Group CTO of Glide. I joined the business 6 months ago today. Came back from Singapore, where I'd been involved in their fibre initiatives and also their first 4G deployments. And prior to that, I was the leader of the disruptor in New Zealand, which was the City Fibre equivalent, Ultra Fast Fibre, which was a wholesale open access organisation. Our business, as you would have seen in the press, sold on Sunday night. It was announced to the markets at 9 a.m. on Monday morning. Big shout out to the government and to the policymakers that have joined this call. We started off the investment process to find a new buyer, and just after Christmas. Some would argue in the holiday season's a bit of a risk. And we were midway through the process when obviously circumstances changed with the COVID-19 pandemic. And many advised that we should probably shut the process down because it could devalue the asset. The newspapers can confirm for all on this call that certainty from government policy creates investment interest and investment activities. We had 30 of the world's largest infrastructure funds targeting our business. Naturally, that depleted through the COVID process as they focused their portfolios on different things, buying real estate. A number of the big ones went hard on buying real estate as the currencies fluctuated around the world. But it was still a bidding war right up until Sunday night. And we're very encouraged about the future. And I came back from a comfortable life in Singapore to be part of the UK fibre revolution, which clearly, listening to everyone talking today and knowing the progress that you've all made, it's exciting times. So I really look forward to hearing the rest of the thoughts from the panel. Thank you.
Steve.
Hi everyone, Steve Layton here, CEO of Aeneas and the founder of the company. I guess my approach to other panelists is slightly different because we were out there last year raising money and secured a decent slug of investment from Macquarie's infrastructure fund. But we did it on the basis that, ironically, we weren't an infrastructure company. We did it on the basis that we were a company that secured customers. So I was pleased to hear Alistair talk about connecting people, because that's kind of what we do. We very much have a mantra within our business of getting people connected and taking customers in rural areas, because we're primarily in rural. In fact, we're exclusively in rural. We take them on a journey and we take them from their sub 10 megabit speed to a decent super fast speed initially, using primarily fixed wireless access. And then when we reach a certain level of take up and penetration within that community, we bring our own fibre solution in. And we're finding that approach is working pretty well. And most of the guys we're connecting in rural areas, and we're doing new deployments pretty much all the time. As Evan Weinberg was saying earlier, we've never been so busy. Most of our customers don't really care where the service comes from or how it gets to them initially. They just want it and they need it. And CV19 has reinforced that requirement for decent connectivity in the more rural areas. So, you know, we successfully raised some cash last year at a decent time in the market, although there did appear to be a man with a van and a fibre plan on pretty much every street corner at that time. But our approach was different, and we managed to secure a good slug of cash on the back of that. And again, thank you for the opportunity to join this panel.
Okay. I've got a few questions. Oliver, do feel free to come back and chip in and ask your questions as well. I'll have a slightly different approach than this one. One of the issues, we had Carolyn earlier, and of course we're all very aware that the government's going to put £5 billion into the Outside In programme. Alistair, £5 billion of government funding, quite a big target behind it. What I'm keen to know is what kind of level of other funding, commercial funding, is going to be needed to kind of like match and sit behind that government funding to actually get that delivered. Any thoughts?
On the route, I mean, obviously it's Outside In for the DCMS funding, which I'll be honest, I agree with. I'm not going to go on about the Ofcom piece and Area 3, but I do agree with the DCMS piece. I think that'll cover the rural 20%. I mean, I have some history in that area myself as well. I think if you look at the rest of the country, you're going to probably be looking at probably somewhere between 25 and 30 billion extra investment as well, and maybe more. I mean, if you look at the moment, if you're building, and again, we're a supporter of PIA, but we're pragmatic and practical about it. So we'll obviously survey with PIA first and then look to see how much we can use, and then we use civils on the rest. And PIA can't be used as much as you think, and I think community probably would vouch for that as well. So if you took in an average cost per property passed, a real one, and then you multiply by that by what we have to cover, I think it'll come out with fairly close to a number that we need to get actually the fibre deployed to basically the poles and the chambers. And then on top of that, you're probably going to need the connection cost as well, and probably going to have to subsidise the connection cost as well to get fibre out there, because a lot of the market is sensitised to the word super fast fibre, and I find that that's sometimes not always a barrier, but can be a barrier to people realising the value of fibre. But once you get it into communities, etc., has an impact. So personally, back of an envelope, I think you're probably going to need at least between 25 and 30 billion to get there, and maybe a little bit more.
Okay. Steve, you any thoughts on that with your focus on rural?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. And in fact, I would argue that out of the major urban areas, it's the cost per premise pass could be significantly higher. So you've got to be really careful about your investment and where you build. And what we try and do in our business is go through an exercise of risk mitigation when we're building in rural areas. So we cannot afford, although we had a good investment last year, we cannot afford to throw cash at speculative investment, whether that be fixed wireless access, 5G or fibre. So we have to build where we know we're going to secure decent customer returns pretty much from the start. And we have to try and do that in a way where we're not forcing people down a pre-sale route, because nobody's happy about a kind of pre-sale approach and very aggressive sales techniques. So yeah, I agree with Alistair. I think we're looking at, you know, £5 from the private sector, or maybe more for every pound that we can get from government in order to give us decent coverage. And I also believe firmly that some of the rural areas will probably not likely ever see a full fibre connection. So it was interesting to see the government's slight change of emphasis in the wording away from full fibre Britain to gigabit Britain, because of course you've got 5G able to deliver gigabit connectivity as well as enhanced fixed wireless access. And as I mentioned earlier, my customers are just keen to have the connectivity that's affordable, reliable and accessible to them. But clearly fibre is the utopia, and wherever that's possible, we should be building that. But that's going to come at a cost, particularly in the rural areas. So yeah, I'm with Alistair on that.
Okay. Deployment. Big, I mean, okay, funding we need to get, I want to come back to that. But Richard, what are we going to do in terms of scaling up and accelerating the deployment?
I think there's a really, really positive discussion earlier from Tom and from his perspective on repurposing highly skilled workforces. The use of the classical farmer / civils professional and repurposing them into the new fibre revolution and the cross-skilling that comes with that. The expertise is transferable. This is my personal opinions now, not those of my company. In terms of a national initiative, when I first got to New Zealand, it was 2% fibre premises passed. When I left, it was 90%. It took many years and a lot of hard work, and people say New Zealand's small and long and thin. It's not true. It's large. It's got volcanic rock. It's got earthquakes, liquefaction. It's got Alps. You couldn't find anywhere harder. You've got distributed populations. It was incredible though, because it was the use and buy-in of councils. It was behaviour such as what Tom just outlined is happening in his locale, in use of cross-skilling of workforces. And to Evan's point, and I totally concur, the investment from us as a sector to drive this revolution forward, to leverage all of those valuable pounds, be it government contribution or our own inward investment, comes from developing the skill sets and the base of resources to power this revolution for the next 10 years. Our aspiration of doing it by 2025 is a great target. Let's go for it. In terms of setting the right expectations, I think we need to change some terminology and phraseology. Hearing the recent cut of those policy documents to say gigabit and doing it in a pragmatic way of absolutely you can't build fibre to 3 sheep and a shepherd in rural parts of this country in the same, the network economics don't stack up in other countries. But what we can do is we can get the fibre to as close as possible to then leverage those other fixed wireless access technologies to deliver high capacity broadband for rural that's equal to or superior to the urban cousins. So I think skilling up the workforces to remove the bottlenecks for progress, agreeing a suitable baseline, which clearly is gigabit speeds, not all of these other definitions. It was notable to me that 2 of the key speakers today were obviously suffering contention on their networks for their delivery of broadband. And this is in the year 2020. I haven't seen buffering on an internet service for 7 or 8 years. It's got nothing to do with Singapore or Hong Kong or New Zealand. It's to do with speeds and network dimensioning. So there's a lot of subtleties in how we're going to do this over the next 5 years. And then lastly, I'd just say on my panelists' comments, I play the 75%, 25% rule. For every government dollar that's contributed, we'll have $4, $3, $5, pounds equivalent back. So that 75, 25% rule is a safe one. And I think the first 5 billion is going to get the party started. And if they drop another 5 billion in and signal that to private enterprise ahead of that money running out, we'll have continued investment in the UK because it's a great place to do business.
Okay, now that is interesting because I was looking at this and just in my very, very rough estimate of not just the last 20%, but if we're going to deliver full fibre or gigabit speeds to the whole of the UK, we've got, £5 billion of government funding coming up. As Richard says, I think we're going to probably need another 5 billion after that. But overall, we're going to need something around 40 to 50 billion pounds of private sector money coming into that, and that's got to be coming from the big funders into the network operators. So Robert, then Charles, how confident do you feel that the sector is ready to take on £50 billion of investment?
I think we're making good steps. I think the thing at the moment that obviously it's come a lot further up the radar of infrastructure funds. They're looking at fibre networks in the UK. They've already looked at fibre networks elsewhere in the world, and finally they're getting around to the UK because finally it's proving to be an issue. Our copper networks are squeaking now. We were blessed with great copper for ages, but that's not good enough. And Openreach, frankly, haven't been incentivized to build a fiber network, which is why we're all here today. Just is my sound working okay now?
It's fine now. Yeah, thank you very much.
So I think this has definitely piqued the interest of infrastructure funds now. So you look at Alinda obviously backing Richard and the Glide team now. There's big infrastructure funds. I would like to say ourselves included, but we're not the biggest out there by any stretch of the imagination. And now keen and willing to back the sector. The thing that infrastructure investors like is they like, as Richard and others have said, they like a stable government, and a stable regulatory environments. At the moment, we're going through the consultation process at the moment, the WFTMR process, which is good to have that kind of consultation. The quicker it gets done, the better, and the cleaner it gets done, the better. And you need to incentivize the people on the screen to be building their networks, because that, as I mentioned, but I was probably a bit quiet, that's what's encouraged Openreach and indeed others to get out there and actually build these fiber networks, or indeed the fixed wireless networks, which I 100% agree are definitely part of the solution. You wouldn't do that with Openreach on its own, but finally now the infrastructure funds are getting out there. So I'm pretty confident that the money will actually be there to build this network. It's build fiber across the UK in the next 5 years. The question is, actually, will the regulations be dynamic enough to allow that? Regulations, I get there's a quinquennium in every utility out there that you set the plan for the next 5 years, but we've got huge ambitions which are completely sensible. You need these ambitions to really help the UK economy. We need a fiber network in the next 5 years, but setting the regulations now for the next 5 years, you have to take quite a view about how exactly this is going to pan out in the next 4 or 5 years, and no one quite knows. Otherwise, everyone will be fully funded business plans right now. It would be the Oracle speaking. But knowing that there's a government there that's and DCMS that's nimble and is out there trying to think how to incentivize the different players. It's great to have the likes of Carolyn on this call, and then also having Ofcom thinking about this and how to encourage everyone to build us exactly where we need to be. And Inca's playing a great part of that.
Charles.
Long answer, quite confident, but ability.
Yeah, I have absolutely no doubt that the funding is there. Funnily enough, I don't think it's ever been an issue for funding. I think, and nor do I think one needs 5 billion of the UK government to trigger funding. In many respects, I think government intervention is often a problem for investors. So I think we need to think very carefully about how the government deploys 5 billion. The number itself may be interesting, but how it's deployed is probably almost more important. Certainly, I think the stable regulatory regime is vital. We've seen over the last several years the infrastructure funds becoming increasingly active in the UK. I mean, there was no infrastructure fund looking at this market in 2014. And now we've had, Richard Jeffers saying that pretty much everyone was looking at Glide. Now, I find that intriguing because only 2 years ago, not a single infrastructure fund was ready to invest in Ask4, which is a very similar company to Glide, although they were looking to buy other businesses. So for sure, the world's dollars are available for fibre in the UK. No issue from there. But my big concern would be, how does the government's intervention play out? And more than anything else, we just need certainty, simplicity. And I did enjoy hearing Carolyn say that there will be regular reappraisal within DCMS of how plans amongst the AllNets and others are evolving, because of course commercial viability changes in terms of a viability of a region year after year. It's much more viable to build in a contiguous region than in a non-contiguous region, for example. So I think we need to be very careful we don't lock in where that money goes now, because quite frankly, it should go somewhere completely different if we reassess it in 12, 24, 36 months' time.
Well, there's an interesting one that we could debate for some time. I've got an interesting question from Tim Stranack. What would be the impact on the investment sector if BT Group were to spin off Openreach?
I'll take that one.
Yeah, go on then.
It kind of depends where the pension liability sits.
That's exactly what I'd said. Thank you. Yeah. And I have a BT pension waiting for me at some point. So.
Or maybe not.
Or maybe not, yes. Sorry, Robert.
I think for that reason, that's why it's speculation. And I think the reason why that was completely denied, even by the executives, and of course they can't deny it if it's actually real, because that's not what you're allowed to do as a chief executive of a public company. I think this is just speculation.
But I'll answer the question. I think it'll drive competition.
Yeah.
Drive competition. Natural forces will take play. Other refined thinking will arrive inside the old oil tanker incumbent. And I have to say, I tapped out of the UK market just after getting 4G going for the London Olympics. And I've come back 7-8 years later from Asia and Silicon Valley and a bit of time in New Zealand. And I think Openreach is a completely different machine. And I'm obviously sitting in a fortunate position. The entrepreneurs that Cameron Barney so kindly sold into the Glide Group, being Warwick now, were disruptive. They did poke the tiger. PIA has obviously evolved now, as everyone's said, to be a regulated product that's got some consistency. There's still improvements being made in the way that it's procured and provisioned, but it's driving good behaviour and there's good network economics there. I think the comment earlier I have to agree with was, you can't rely on it everywhere, so we do have to focus on other means sometimes to get to those customers. But it's a great tool in the toolbox, and I think if Openreach was spun out into a completely private enterprise mindset with a board of directors flanked from a large infra fund who drove performance thinking and KPIs, that the behaviour would change downstairs in the teams, and we'd maybe see other services that look like PIA that sweat the other infrastructure assets that help us with the fibre revolution. I think it'd be a great thing. Great for the country. It's good for UK Inc.
Okay, we've got another question from David Cullen. Does the panel think that Ofcom's suggestion for the 3 regulatory areas provides more stability or less for the major infrastructure investors? And which of the 3 areas would they most want to put their money in? I'm going to have to slightly adjust David's view. As I understand, yes, Ofcom describes 3 areas, but I believe only 2 actually exist, and those are Area 2 and Area 3, if that makes sense. It probably doesn't make sense on so many levels, but Robert, views on that?
It is a very live debate. Obviously, we all submitted responses into the WFTMRs, so Zinka. I think the challenge is what exactly will those areas, what will Openreach be allowed to do or not to do in those areas? At the moment, it feels like effectively Area 3 means Openreach are allowed to be anti-competitive and use their dominant market position. So for me, if large areas get denominated as classified as Area 3, then it's pretty illogical for an infrastructure fund or anyone to back a company building a large amount in those areas. If Openreach have got huge powers to slash their prices to 0 if they wanted to make other companies go pop. If they've got incentives to overbuild everyone because they say that someone else's platform isn't wholesale enough compared to theirs. There's a huge amount of anti-competitive behaviour that Openreach can do, not saying they would do, but they can do in Area 3 if that's allowed. So if you gave me a choice between Area 2 and Area 3, I'd probably prefer to be in Area 2, sorry, which is why the definition of these areas is really key, and why it's really key that it's not set in stone on day one. Otherwise, we'll end up with reliance on Openreach to build the final, 10 million homes in the UK by 2025, and they haven't got a great track record in doing that.
And anybody else want to comment on that?
Well, I've got a strong opinion on Area 3. We give a submission as well. I just like to point out that the picture behind me is a town, a very affluent town in the southeast, and that's currently classified as Area 3. It's very commercially viable, and it just means the fact that how can DCMS have a model that comes out with about 4 million properties from the outside in, maybe up to 5, and Ofcom can come up with 10 million that includes a lot of very affluent towns that for some reason have just been missed out by Openreach, and because they haven't currently got Virgin in there, they're classified as Area 3. So I think it's going to be quite a debate going to be had about this Area 3 definition, because probably 4 to 5 million of those properties are totally illogical that they're in Area 3. They're competitive, and they shouldn't be classified as non-competitive. And that's where we're probably going to have a conversation with Ofcom, and also we'll have to see how the government reacts as well with DCMS to see if some sort of sanity is brought to this Area 3 discussion.
Yeah, I think what's clear is that Area 3 is going to completely overlap the FTIR Area F20. And so that's where DCMS wants to encourage investment by putting in their 5 billion. So if they want to encourage investment, and Ofcom is basically encouraging essentially anti-competitive behavior from Openreach, the two are completely incompatible as far as I can see. We need to do something else. Got an interesting question from Evan while we're thinking about that one. What does the panel think would be the extent and speed of delivery of Gigabit Britain if the government did not provide funding? Steve.
How did I know you were going to ask me on that one? I mean, the simple answer to that question is I've got no bloody idea.
Okay. Would they go into into Area 3 at all, into the F20 at all, if there was no funding?
Well, I think probably yes, because there's a national requirement for us to do so. So I think I can only speak from a Veneas perspective, and we're completely unreliant on any form of government funding and subsidy. So we're building commercially, and as I mentioned earlier, we're mitigating the risks around our build by making sure we get the customers. So from a personal perspective and from a Veneas perspective, then, you know, we would carry on building as we are, and hopefully, or potentially, we could have more opportunities if government funding wasn't available, if businesses were out there who were looking to secure government funding on the back of their own commercial investment. So, you know, the two were going hand in hand for some. But from a personal perspective, I think we'd have to carry on building as much as we can, as quickly as we can, and as cost effectively and commercially viably as we can.
Okay. I would.
I'm happy to add to that if you want to.
Go on, one of you first then.
Please do.
I was going to say that I think Steve is right. I mean, there's commercially viable areas in Area 3, especially with fixed wireless access that obviously Veneas's Centre of Veneas's plans. But I think if the government wasn't funding the very rural areas, then you would have a nibbling around the edge effect. So it would take longer, but it would eventually happen, I believe, where people would build their commercial areas, and then gradually it becomes more, as the point that Charles made earlier.
There'd be a bit more cherry picking going on for sure.
So it would happen. It would just take longer.
Yeah.
So my proposal would be for the very, I think Carolyn was talking about it. You do the very, very rural areas first, and then you meet in the middle.
Okay. Charles, quick comment. We do need to wrap up. Rob's just sort of pointed out that we're beyond time and people are starting to sort of drop off. So.
Okay. Well, I agree. Start at the very, very rural would be my view. I certainly think that what we're facing is it would definitely be slower without government money. Let's not forget that Barn, on this call, not a cent of government money, in deep rural, doing it very successfully. Personally, I was an investor amongst the first few hundreds of thousands of pounds in GigaClear. Rural, when everyone thought completely impossible. These things are very commercial if you look after the customer, to Steve's point. And so I think this would absolutely happen without government money. It would just happen more slowly.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, everybody. I will have to say that that Barn, yeah, I mean, we all kind of love Barn and what they've done. I have to admit, skeptical when they first started out in terms of their approach and what they were doing, and I wondered how scalable it would really be. I kind of still wonder how scalable it would really be. But when I look at Rural Project, I was looking at a project up in Scotland, just in the borders, and Barry had been up there. Everyone was really enthused, and suddenly they realised they had 4 times the area that Barn covered, less than half the population of the Barn area covered, and significantly number of more trees. And so there are places a lot more rural and a lot more difficult to get to than even sort of significantly rural Lancashire. So there are some bigger challenges that we do need to address. Anyway, I think that has to bring us to a close. Rob, have you only got sort of last sort of comments from sort of the Inca perspective?
I think there's still a couple of outstanding questions, but I think we've had a very good discussion. So thanks to everybody that's attended and spoken, but also thanks to Helm and Titan. I mean, we can continue if people want to, but I know a lot of people are dropping off, and I think we were scheduled to finish at, was it 4:15 or even 4:30?
4:30.
So we're well over target anyway. But yes, from an Inca perspective, you know, thanks to everybody, and thanks to Helm and Titan for sponsoring. We've got a bunch more events coming up, so keep an eye on the Inca mailings and the website. Unless we want to carry on, I suggest we probably close it there and thank all the speakers, panelists, and attendees.
Indeed. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Be safe.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah. Stay safe. Thanks all.
Everyone gone, have they?
I think so. Most. Just hanging around to see if there's any stragglers.
Charles is frozen in. Or if he's gone or not.
Yeah. Jill, are you still on?
I am. I'm just waiting for the last attendee to come off.
Have you got the end button? All I've got is a leave button. So I don't think I'm the webinar host anymore for some reason.
Oh.
I don't think Charles is going anywhere. I think he's frozen. I don't think he's on.
No, I think he's
gone. I'll remove him anyway.
There we go. I've done it.
Oh, okay, you beat me to it.
Yeah, I have got the end button.
Okay, cool. You're right, Lloyd? Thoughts? Before we crash out, everyone else is gone.
I think that there's a couple of very erudite people there, isn't there? I mean, doesn't Michael Maltby comes over as incredibly erudite, more so in the conversation I had with him this morning than he did actually in that conversation.
Did you say erudite or arrogant?
No, not arrogant is not what I said. It's erudite.
Ah,
and
erudite. Okay.
You've also got. I thought there was a couple of people came over really well. What was the close that Carolyn was talking about? She had something closed on Monday. What was that? I didn't hear what she I couldn't work out what she was saying.
Closed on Monday. Was she talking about the gigabit voucher scheme?
I don't know.
Closed on Monday.
He said that's all closed. I don't know whether there was a call that had gone out or something. I'm thinking, have I missed something? But,
Monday. I don't think so. Let's have a look. What happened on Monday? Anything in particular? No. The only thing that's closed recently is the old gigabit voucher scheme. Which I think was Monday, was it? Rural. But there is another gigabit voucher scheme that's still running.
Yeah.
And there'll be more with the outside in.
Yeah. Oh well.
I'm not quite sure.
I wasn't quite sure what that was about, but I thought it was a good conference actually. I've got to be honest. I sort of was interested by a lot of things I heard. makes me feel very. Some of the times I hear some of these people think, I just think all these years I've been in it and I know nothing.
Yeah, I know what you mean. There are so many. There's such a lot of good experience out there and good knowledge.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I feel the same sometimes. But yeah, no, I thought it went well. The obvious usual glitches and issues with connectivity, which is kind of to be expected. But you kind of wish people would join the practice and test, and then not divert from their setup in the real one, because people test and then they tend to move rooms, and then suddenly the Wi-Fi coverage is worse, or the audio isn't very good, or whatever, you know.
But the background's better.
Yes. Yes, true. But yeah, I thought it went well. I've just, Jill, for your information, I've captured all of the questions into a text document, because sometimes